Hello, I'm Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, jns.org, and you're listening to Top Story, a weekly podcast where I analyze the most important stories happening in Jewish news around the world. Each week, I will break down politics, foreign policy, and culture to provide insights into what is going on behind the headlines. Hello, and welcome to Top Story. For those who grew up during the Vietnam War and its aftermath, the idea that the United States was a declining world power was a familiar one. But after the defeat in Southeast Asia and the loss of national self-confidence that seemed to get its fullest expression during the Jimmy Carter presidency, the Ronald Reagan era and victory in the Cold War as the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Empire were both toppled seemed to reinvigorate America's sense of itself as a player on the world stage. But the 9/11 attacks and the subsequent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan reflected not only new challenges from Islamist foes, but a world in which there was only one true superpower. As the conflict in Afghanistan came to an end this past weekend with a humiliating defeat and embarrassment, new questions are being posed not only about the Biden administration, but about whether America is once again in decline on the world stage. The implications of such a question go beyond what Americans think of themselves and whether the seeming consensus that stretches from the America First Trump supporters to Democrats who want no part of American power projection abroad for different reasons about the need to withdraw from foreign conflicts, and maybe even the world stage, to those being asked by America's allies. What does it mean to live in a Middle East where the U.S. has not only suffered a defeat, but where its foreign policy priorities appear set on a new bout of appeasement with another Islamist state, Iran? How does this retrenchment impact the U.S. Israel relationship, especially at a time when the voices of anti-Zionists and intersectional thinking are growing louder and gaining influence in one of America's two major parties? To discuss all this and more, we're very honored to have with us today someone with unique insights into the strategic situation as well as the U.S.-Israel relationship. Michael Oren was Israel's ambassador to the United States from 2009 to 2013. A native of the United States who was raised in New Jersey, he's a graduate of Princeton and Columbia, who served as an emissary to refuseniks in the former Soviet Union, made Aliyah, and served as a lone soldier in the paratroops and then as a spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces. As a historian, he is the author of such seminal works as 6 Days of War, The Authoritative History of the 1967 War, and Power, Faith, and Fantasy, a survey of the relationship between the United States and the Middle East, and his memoir, Ally, a book which not only told the story of his life, but provided tremendous insight into the U.S.-Israel alliance and the fractious relationship between the Netanyahu government and the Obama administration. Following his time in Washington, he was elected to the Knesset and served as a deputy minister in the Prime Minister's office. Now out of politics, he has resumed life as a lecturer and author, his latest work being a mystery novel, To All Who Call in Truth, which is set in 1970s suburban America. Michael Oren, welcome to Top Story.
So good to be with you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Michael, I want to start by asking you about what is clearly the top story this week, the debacle in Afghanistan. Leaving aside the question of how or why this happened, what do you think are the consequences of this for America's position as a world power with respect to its ability to influence events in the Middle East? And what, if any, are the implications for Israel and the Arab nations who have become its strategic allies, especially with respect to Iran?
Good to be with you, Jonathan, again. It's a double blow for America's allies in the Middle East. The first blow is one experienced by America's allies elsewhere in the world, the Germans, the South Koreans, the Japanese. All of us depend, to one extent or another, on the image of American power, on America's ability and a will to project significant military power around the world, to stand up to rivals, whether they be Russian rivals, Chinese rivals. So that is a significant blow right there. But we actually have an additional blow because America has suffered a defeat not just at the hands of any enemy, but at the hands of an Islamic extremist enemy. Strangely enough, I was on an Israeli television program last night, and I ventured to say that Hamas was celebrating the Taliban victory in the streets of Gaza, and they came on with a news alert saying that there were celebrations going on in the streets of Gaza. So it was no surprise, and this will embolden Islamic extremists throughout the region, certainly Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS. So for Israel and its Middle Eastern allies, our newfound Arab allies, the American debacle in Afghanistan is a double blow.
Right. Well, obviously neither Israel nor the Arab states that have embraced it are exactly comparable to Afghanistan because, of course, Israel doesn't rely on American troops or direct American air power to survive. But the strategic balance in the region has certainly been reconfigured in the last decade with both Russia and Iran gaining influence and Iran's terrorist allies, as you said, presenting ongoing strategic threats to Israel from both the north and the south. There's always talk of imminent war, but are you worried about an escalation getting out of hand, especially in the north, triggering a wider conflict because Israel's enemies have been emboldened by this?
No, but it certainly contributes to the possibility that one will break out. So the contrary forces, the failure thus far of the United States and what's called the P5+1, the Security Council members plus Germany, to achieve a renewal of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. And I am more than persuaded, Jonathan, should that deal be renewed, we will be put on an inexorable path toward regional conflict, not a local conflict, but a regional conflict. I can spell it out for you if you'd like. I'm not sure I'll ruin your night. But so right now they have not been able to renew the 2015 deal, the JCPOA, which is good news for the state of Israel. But I think the impairment of the image of Americans' power and of its willingness to pursue its strategic goals through military power is one with which we've had to deal. I came back from Washington in 2014, and I met with the Israeli leadership, both in the civilian and military echelons. And I had one message to them, Jonathan. I said, gentlemen, ladies, we are on our own. We are on our own as we haven't been since the 1967 war. Israel fought the 1967 war without a single American bullet. It wasn't if America was Israel's strategic partner back then. So it wasn't the worst news in the world, and Israel is vastly stronger than it was in 1967, but that was the word. And the reason I came back from Washington with this message to Israel was that I saw that Americans were exhausted, demoralized by two failed wars in the Middle East, by economic crises, by political polarization, and whether it be the administration of Barack Obama or the administration of Donald Trump and now the administration of Joe Biden, they are all equally isolationist. They're all about withdrawal, and that we had to internalize this, and we had depended on America's willingness to project large-scale military power for I'd say 2 generations at least. And I think you agree with me. Can you imagine almost any situation today, any circumstance, in which the United States would do today what it did in 2003, which was send 600,000 soldiers halfway around the world to the Middle East? Any circumstance, hard for me to imagine. Now that is a crucial conclusion for the state of Israel. Crucial. I was a young paratrooper in Beirut in 1982, and we all understood that if the Israel Defense Forces got into a fix, that President Reagan was going to send the Marines to get us out, and he did. But guess what? The Marines aren't coming today, and we get into a fix, we will be on our own.
I think that's a very important point, and you're clearly right that there is a broad consensus in the United States, despite tremendous polarization on just about everything else, that Americans don't want any more wars in the Middle East. Republicans and Democrats disagree about or any war anywhere. Or could you imagine United States sending troops to defend Taiwan? I guess it would be the same question.
There's a bit of a debate about that. I've had a debate here with Israeli, policy thinkers and journalists about that. Most Israelis are under the impression that the United States would still act militarily to defend Taiwan. I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree with you about that. It's very hard to imagine the circumstances under which that could become possible. But let me just back up. You started already into Iran. That was kind of my next question. But even as we're discussing what you rightly describe as a sort of cross-party consensus in the United States about withdrawal from the Middle East, for the 4 years of the Trump administration, there was a very different atmosphere in terms of diplomatically, as opposed to the Obama administration, which you experienced firsthand, and now what we're seeing with the Biden administration. Did that have any strategic effect? Obviously, the Abraham Accords are very important, but is that really just a sidebar to the main story about American withdrawal, or did that have real impact and a lasting impact on the relationship?
Well, let's go back and look at the origin of these accords. On one hand, a great debt is owed to President Obama. He set out to bring Arabs and Jews closer together through peace. He succeeded, just not through peace. He brought us together through common opposition to his policies, particularly his policy toward Iran, brought us together. President Trump also brought us together by withdrawing from Syria and leaving the area to the Russians and to the Turks. And for the states of the Gulf in particular, they face a twin threat. They face not only Shiite Iran, they face Sunni Turkey, which is the major backer of the Muslim Brotherhood. So if America was kind of disappearing, that left only one country in the entire region that was willing to stand up to both to Iran and to Turkey, and that's us. And they quickly internalized that we are not the enemy, we're the ally, hence the Abraham Accords. I think that the Trump administration was willing to sort of grandfather those accords, but I think they would have happened anyway. And I think I would recommend, and maybe we can get into this, I would recommend to the Biden administration now that they take a page from the Ford administration and turn around after this debacle and humiliation in Afghanistan, do what President Ford did in 1975 after the fall of Saigon, was to turn around and launch diplomatic initiatives throughout the world, particularly in the Middle East. And it was through Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy that same year in 1975 that we later got a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. So it actually bore fruit. I would hope that the Biden administration would embrace the Abraham Accords. Cease looking for an Anwar Sadat in Ramallah and Tehran, because they're not going to find one there. There are lots of Sadats around; they're just not in Ramallah and Tehran. And use these accords to make a regional peace agreement. They could have some type of arrangement for the Palestinians as well, and make a big difference and restore America's credibility through diplomacy that is realistic and achievable.
That's an excellent suggestion, and I hope you've conveyed that to I think we should all convey that to Antony Blinken. But my response, just as a journalist, never mind somebody who cares about Israel, is what could possibly lead you to believe that the people in place in this administration would do that? This is an Obama administration alumni club back, in Washington. It's the same foreign policy establishment that produced those figures is now back in control. They are, as they have been always, fixated on the idea of that peace comes through, Israel and the Palestinians, not through other, through relations with other countries. That would require a major reassessment of ideas that most of these people have been dedicated to, and it's certainly, while you might argue that sort of more moderate figures at the very top, like Secretary of State Blinken and the National Security Advisor Sullivan, maybe they might do it, but certainly everybody below them, most everyone below them in the State Department and the NSC are to the left of them, if that phrase is a little off, but who are certainly even more dedicated to the Palestinian track and to the Iran track. So, and this is a serious question. It's not a rhetorical one. Is there anything that you've seen in the way they've operated that would lead you to believe they might actually do that? And that's a great point about what Ford did. But do you see that happening? In any way? What leads you to think that might happen?
I didn't say it was going to happen. It was my suggestion. And I agree with much of your assessment of the outlook of that particular wing of the Democratic Party. Listen, we got very lucky with this administration, and I think you're intimating that the people at the top don't necessarily share the same progressive agenda. I know Tony Blinken very well. I know Jake Sullivan very well. I know Joe Biden very well. Joe Biden was my major point of contact in the Obama administration. It's not well known that Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, boycotted the Israeli embassy. I wouldn't return my phone calls. It's actually in that ally book, but it's not well known. Mm-hmm. It was part of the Obama administration's effort to take us down, to take down the relationship several notches. It had been a special relationship. Right. Obama set out to normalize, quote unquote, that relationship. And one way they did it was to make the Secretary of State inaccessible to the Israeli embassy. But Joe Biden wouldn't go along with it. And he was always accessible. And he loves Israel. And I know this. And he's deeply committed to the alliance with Israel. But he is a Democrat. And yes, they have certain positions vis-a-vis Iran and the Palestinian issue, which are generally incompatible with those of the state of Israel. And on the Iran issue, I'd say that more emphatically. Okay, there are positions there that might endanger the state of Israel, and perhaps even endanger us strategically and existentially. So it's no laughing matter, no small thing. With the Palestinian issue, it's pretty immaterial because there's nobody on the Palestinian side who has the authority or the ability to actually negotiate with us. So it's kind of a moot point. But I know the lower echelons. Okay, we're talking about the undersecretaries and the deputy secretaries. Are you right? They subscribed deeply to the two-state notion, what they call, the notion that you cannot make peace in the Middle East unless you first have Israeli-Palestinian peace, and the Israeli-Palestinian peace is predicated on Israeli withdrawal to more or less the 67 borders, the uprooting of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens from their communities, the redivision of Jerusalem, all of that. Okay. All of that will bring about peace in the Middle East. The fact that it has been totally and utterly disproven by the Abraham Accords has had almost no bearing on that. It's extraordinary because we're not talking about empirical positions or empirically based positions. We're talking about religious beliefs here, and they're very difficult to refute. On the Iranian issue, it's no longer about the details of the JCPOA. Again, the fundamental assumptions of the JCPOA that somehow if Iran was engaged honestly and incentivized financially and brought into the international community, that it would begin to become, quote unquote, a successful and responsible regional power. That's been utterly refuted by facts. But that has had no bearing on the commitment of very senior officials and certainly of the heart of the Democratic Party to seek a renewal of the JCPOA, which is extraordinary from an Israeli point of view. But again, this is not about facts; it's about religious belief, and the JCPOA has been elevated to sort of almost a religious doctrine. So it is very difficult. So it's amazing that we have the people at the top of this administration who may not share those views, who are actually going kind of slow on the negotiations with the Iranians. And they have had the Iranians opposing them at every turn, which has been very much welcomed by the state of Israel. I think they're realists to know that there's no one really to talk to on the Palestinian side, and we may be dealing with the Middle East that does not have an Iran nuclear deal in it. Either way, it's an opportunity, I think, for Israel to engage in an intimate discussion with these top officials and to reach some important understandings about how we can better defend ourselves.
You alluded to the difficulty the Biden administration has been having in attaining its desired goal of reentering the Iran nuclear deal. The Iranians have proved, as they did in the first round of negotiations with the Obama team, very tough and making outrageous demands. And so far, certainly President Biden and Secretary Blinken have not have been thwarted. But I think the expectation, from some people is that the Iranians think that sooner or later Biden will, sweeten the deal. He'll do something to make it easier for them to go in, and they'll get their way. Do you think there's any hope? You've kind of alluded to the possibility of a Middle East without an Iran nuclear deal. Do you think there's any possibility? Do you think there's a real possibility they will renew it? And if they do, that they can, as they say they want to strengthen the deal, as certainly the Trump administration said that was their goal, to get rid of the sunset clauses and to include things like terrorism and missile building. Is that realistic from your point of view?
I think there's a real danger that the agreement will be renewed. To the degree that danger is mitigated, we in Israel, and I think throughout the Middle East, owe a certain debt to former Secretary of State Pompeo, who passed a number of sanctions, a great number of sanctions, on Iran that have nothing to do with the Iran nuclear deal. It has to do with Iranian violations of human rights, women's rights, children's rights. And the Congress is not about to lift those sanctions, and the Iranians are demanding that those sanctions be lifted as a precondition for renewing the JCPOA. So they're kind of locked in. It's going to have to. It would require some rather creative and, from our perspective, some reckless diplomacy to incentivize the Iranians to renew the JCPOA without lifting up these sanctions. But it's possible. It's quite possible, Jonathan, and we have to prepare for it. We have to prepare for every contingency. Prime Minister Bennett is about to go to Washington, and I hope he would enter into an intimate discussion with President Biden. And the subject would be, okay, if you're set on renewing this thing, and it's going to deeply endanger us and perhaps lead us into a path to regional war, how are you, the United States, how is the administration is going to reinforce Israel's security through enhancing our capabilities, but also reaching understandings? What will be America's position if Israel has to act to defend itself? We need to know and go into great detail about it. That can only be done on a basis of trust. That basis of trust could not exist between former Prime Minister Netanyahu and former President Obama. Could not. But I hope between these two gentlemen, maybe they could have that type of conversation. The administration's stated policy is that after renewing the JCPOA, they will seek a longer and stronger agreement that will take into account Iran's intercontinental ballistic system. Iran now possesses missiles that they have a dual use. They use to send up satellites into space, but those missiles can now hit Paris. And pretty soon they'll be able to hit London. And in another decade, according to Israeli intelligence estimates, they will be able to hit New York and Washington. And the JCPOA not only does not address the ballistic issue, it actually lifts a UN embargo on the development of ballistic missiles. You can't make this stuff up. It's really insane.
Right.
And it will also, the longer and stronger agreement is also supposed to address what they call, I think euphemistically, Iran's malign behavior, which is Iran being the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. Its repeated attempts to destroy the state of Israel, to overthrow pro-Western governments in the Middle East. That's malign behavior. But in Israel, there's a tremendous amount of skepticism about the administration's ability to achieve such an agreement, because in order to achieve the renewal of the JCPOA, the Biden administration will have to give up almost all of its leverage, which are the Trump era sanctions. And so, how exactly are you going to induce the Iranians to come back to the negotiating table? The Iranians have made it clear that, they'll go back and negotiate with you, but what we're going to negotiate about is America's support for Israel.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, obviously, it's a very difficult thing. I guess the only worry is if Biden's going to be so desperate for a diplomatic triumph that he'll actually do something like that.
It is something you have to take into consideration. My wish is that he turns a different way, that he embraces the Abraham Accords and actually brings peace to a large segment of the Middle East. And if he's looking for a Sadat, as I said earlier, there are a bunch of Sadats here. They're just not in Tehran, right. And they're not in Ramallah either.
Mm-hmm. Let alone Gaza. Yeah. Michael, you are somebody who knows the U.S. Israel relationship, very intimately, both as someone who grew up in this country, someone who has followed it and documented it as a historian. And I would add that anybody who really wants to understand the history of the United States and the Middle East really needs to read Power, Faith, and Fantasy. I think it's, as much as I like your other books, it's a really, really important book for people to get a grasp of, the whole scope of the relationship. But right now we're in an interesting moment in the United States. We're in a moment where there is an increasingly loud and influential left-wing movement with enormous influence in the Democratic Party that embraces intersectional ideology and is clearly hostile to Israel and Zionism. And so I guess I want to ask you, as a historian, where do you think we are as in terms of the Israel U.S. relationship because of this development? It was one thing when sort of the two parties exchanged identities over the last 50 or 60 years, as the Republicans became the pro-Israel party and the Democrats became the iffy party. Now the Democrats are dealing with a real challenge on that issue. Where do you see that going?
Well, I think one of our deepest concerns, certainly my deepest concern, is not only the degree to which people in the United States express animosity toward the state of Israel, it's the degree to which Americans express hostility to their own state. It's difficult to, I think you could probably prove this statistically, that people who love the United States of America are more prone to love the state of Israel as well. And conversely, people who don't like the state of Israel aren't particularly crazy about their own country. And it's one thing for people to be critical of the state of Israel, but when people begin to view their own country as somehow lacking legitimacy, as inherently racist, as inherently evil, that's also a strategic danger for the state of Israel. It is a Israeli national strategic interest that Americans love and support their country, that they're willing to defend their country, that they see America as a force for good in the world. Because I'll tell you, honestly, Jonathan, a world without the United States of America in it is a far, far more dangerous world. It's dangerous for Americans, but you got a few oceans around you, and you don't have particularly hostile countries on your border. But for those of us who are in some tough neighborhoods, a world without the United States is frightening.
I think you're absolutely right, Michael. I think no matter what discussion you're having right now, whatever issue you're trying to delve into, it all seems to come back to this idea of critical race theory and intersectionality in terms of the future of the United States and how it affects the rest of the world. That's really important. But it also plays into the idea of bipartisanship. That's the whole conceit of AIPAC, the whole conceit of the pro-Israel movement in this country has always been, we need friends in both parties. And indeed, there are still friends in both parties. There are still very pro-Israel Democrats, and certainly in Congress. But as this grows, what do you see as the future of bipartisanship and the future of this whole idea that the relationship between Israel and the United States rests on something that is embraced by a broad cross-section of Americans?
I think it's become increasingly difficult to sustain. And I don't think anybody's going to have issue with when I say that, even in AIPAC. I saw it a decade ago already in Washington. It was like, you had a foot in two different, in each cart. The carts are going in opposite directions. And your legs are getting pulled apart all the time. And it has created a situation where not only does AIPAC face a challenge in maintaining bipartisan support, but it also maintains a problem maintaining bipartisan support and being on the same page with the state of Israel. For example, AIPAC has positions that were not the positions of the previous Israeli government, both on the peace process and on the Iran nuclear deal, particularly on the peace process. We're openly in favor of the two-state solution, whereas the Israeli government was not, and I don't think anybody should press Naftali Bennett about it and find out that he's also not on that page. So it's just a very difficult situation. Listen, in an ideal world, I still believe that bipartisan support for Israel in Congress is an important strategic asset for the state of Israel, and we should work to preserve it to the best we can. But here's the rub, Jonathan, and this is hard for Israelis to internalize. There are processes going on in the United States. You mentioned several of them: intersectionality, critical race theory, censor culture, political correctness, wokeism. These have nothing to do with the state of Israel. We can't impact these at all. We can't influence them. Yes, we are the receiving end of them, but our ability to change them is close to nil. Right. We could probably create a Palestinian state tomorrow. On the 67 borders, we could redivide Jerusalem. I don't think it would tilt the needle very much. Not all Israelis agree with me. I don't think it would tilt the needle very much because it's no longer about what we do. It's about who we are. And if you believe that we are a white or Jewish supremacist colonialist state, no matter what we do, even if we do good, it's going to be a washing of some kind. So if we are a world leader in LGBT rights, it's pink washing. And, I'm sure now we're having corona washing that we're developing and high-tech washing. And because anything we do good then is actually evil because it's used to camouflage evil. And our ability to impact that is very, very limited. And I think you agree with me.
Yeah.
And so we have to be realistic about this. It's painful for me. I can tell you on a personal level, I went through sort of a mourning period. I grew up in a very different America. My father landed on Normandy Beach. And our house always flew the American flag. And what was going on in America was acutely personally painful for me. You mentioned my book. You're very nice and generous in talking about the book Power, Faith, and Fantasy. America in the Middle East from 1776 to the present was the labor of love of my life, because it brought together the two halves of my life: my love for the Middle East, my love for America, and so much has happened. I don't know how I would actually write that book today. It would be very difficult.
Well, it would be a different book, wouldn't it?
It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, things have certainly changed, no question about it. We could go into that more, but I want to sort of switch gears for a moment and ask you about Israel and its politics. Mm-hmm. Your Knesset experience gave you a chance to see a very different view, both of the Netanyahu government, which you had served as a diplomat, as well as the inner workings of the Knesset and its famous dysfunctional character. What's the most important thing you learned as an MK and as a deputy minister that you had no real idea about before you took on that role?
First of all, I learned how much I don't know about politics. Sorry, it was very humbling. Politics is a profession. And after 4 years in Knesset, I began to understand what I didn't understand. And had respect for people who had far greater experience than I had. What I did not know, what I did not appreciate, was the degree to which being in Knesset enables you to serve the Israeli public. So in front of your office in the Knesset, there's always a long line of petitioners, people with all sorts of problems, and you can help them. And that is the major work of a Knesset member. Now, I had diplomatic roles, I had legislative roles, I was head of a classified committee on foreign affairs, which was fascinating and terrifying at the same time. And you do all these things. As the deputy to the prime minister, I was hosting a foreign leader pretty much every week, at least one per week. That was fascinating. But the really, truly surprising and rewarding part of being in the Knesset was helping the Israeli public and being there for them. And all branches, all strata of that public. It was immensely fulfilling to me, I got to tell you. With all the dysfunctionality of the Knesset, I think relatively certainly to many other parliaments in the world, the Knesset can be actually very highly functional. We passed more pieces of legislation than just about any parliament in the world. Our problem is not with passing legislation; it's enforcing legislation. One of the lowest levels of enforcement in the world. That's another problem. That's the problem with the courts, not necessarily the Knesset. So it was all in all a very favorable experience for me.
Well, that's very fascinating because, of course, one of the flaws or elements of the Israeli system, which is depicted as a flaw, is the fact that no one is elected from a specific constituency. It's all just
right.
Lists, one nation. It's one district for the whole nation, and nobody really has their own MK. So it's a free for all in terms of getting anybody to do anything for you. But yet, you seem to be saying that somehow that works anyway.
It works anyway because it's not geographical. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
It is topical. So every MK takes issues that are close to her, his heart. So what do? I was a lone soldier, so I took on lone soldiers. I had a new immigrant, I took on new immigrants. I dealt with Druze issues and Bedouin issues. I dealt with women's issues, close to my heart. I dealt with foreign affairs, particularly with foreign aid issues. I instituted the first, foreign aid day in the Knesset. I instituted the first lobby for the Knesset, for a caucus for lone soldiers. We held hearings about it. So you take these constituencies, and everyone knows that if you're a lone soldier who's got a problem, you know who to go to in the Knesset. It's not necessarily, the right distinguished representative from Jaffa, which is where I live. It is the right distinguished representative of lone soldiers, new immigrants, Druze, and Bedouin.
Well, that's great. That's interesting to know. You're now out of politics, or at least for the moment, or the time being. You can tell us different if you're planning a comeback. What's your impression of Israel's current multi-party, multi-ideological government? Can it last? And also, do you think that we're experiencing merely a short break in the Netanyahu era that will continue to unfold in the future, or is it actually over?
think it's a good government in two ways. One, it is the most ideologically variegated, expansive government we've owned. Extreme right, extreme left, up, down. It's got everybody, and I think that is a testament to the depth and strength of Israeli democracy. It is. It is a government that gives this country a break. And I think, to a certain degree, also in the United States, people needed it. We were all living from crisis to crisis, certainly after Corona, and we needed some quiet. And it's giving some quiet. And the very variety of ideas, because there is no Netanyahu in this government, there's no one really at the helm here, has enabled various ministers to effect reforms that were impossible previously, including challenging the ultra-Orthodox Haredi monopoly over kashrut. It's extremely important in this country to break that monopoly, but there are other monopolies that break it as well. And we were unable to do that. I was a member of a party that was dedicated to breaking monopolies, and we didn't break a single one. Amazing, in 4 years. So this government is actually getting those things done, and maybe perhaps putting our relationship with the United States on a better footing. Having said that, I don't know whether this government would survive, say, a war with Hamas or with Hezbollah. The presence of an Arab party in the coalition is extraordinary. It's a sea change. I think, Jonathan, it's the most important development, most significant development in Israeli politics since 1977, since the Likud's overthrow of the labor monopoly. Very significant. It is significant. It has brought 21% of our population into the political game. It's made a fool of the Arab politicians who only served Ramallah and Gaza. And it has also put the Haredim in a very difficult position, because if Haredim represent 13% of the population, they were the swing votes before. But now with 21% of the population, the Arabs being the swing vote, the Haredim have to alter their politics as well. It's a real sea change. It's a huge sea change. And I think, overwhelmingly for the better. We have a peculiar, to say the least, status quo right now. It's sort of a balance of power where Netanyahu needs the Bennett government because it's a weak government. It's a vulnerable government. Anywhere you shoot, you're going to hit some vital organ, right? You can go on gay marriage or annexation of the West Bank. Either one's going to be a huge problem for this coalition. And Bennett and Lapid need Netanyahu, because without Netanyahu, the government has no raison d'etre. It will fall apart.
Right.
So it's a strange sort of mutually assured destruction there. It reminds you of the Cold War, the 60s and the 70s. So this government could last for a long time. There is one thing, though, I have learned through many years of political involvement, and that is it is always premature to predict the demise of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, well, I think he's proved that many times. We'll see if he's got another life, out of the 9 that he seems to have begotten. Interesting, you talked about the role of the Haredim, and let me go back to a moment. I guess it would be 12 years ago, or more than 12 years ago, in early 2009, when I was actually at Commentary magazine, and before you were appointed to be ambassador, you wrote a piece.
I know where you're going. Yes.
Do you remember this?
It was 2007, but okay. Yeah.
Or whenever it was.
Yeah.
I think it was just before it, because you wrote a piece about the really existential challenges to Israel, and one of them that you listed, along with Iran and all the other security threats, was the future of a large segment of the population that was not involved in the workforce, that was not taking part in national defense, and where that was going. And you kind of sounded a very pessimistic note. And then I think when you got appointed ambassador, you kind of wanted to pull that back. But are you as pessimistic now about the future of the Haredi sector, or is there any hope that you've gotten since then?
I wouldn't call it pessimistic. I'm deeply concerned. And I'm more deeply concerned today than I was in 2007. And right. The statistics will bear me out. And that is that all of the predictions show that within 20, 30 years, between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2 elementary school students in this country will be Haredi. They will be receiving a second grade education at most. Very little math, no English. And yes, they will not be able to defend the country, but they won't be able to sustain the country. And the whole model will not be sustainable. And the people who are actually paying taxes will say, to hell with it, I'm getting out of here. And I'm not going to pay for this. Because right now, the percentage of the Israeli tax base that are paid by the Haredim goes down every year, not up. That's not a sustainable model. And I have nothing but, in many ways, admiration for the Haredi way of life. This is a population that, in many ways, has volunteered to be impoverished, to serve God, to serve the Jewish people as they see it. But they're also part of a polity, and they're also citizens of the state. And you can't. In the Torah, there's a great story about the two tribes that didn't want to go over the Jordan and fight the Canaanites. And Moses turns to them and says, "What? You're going to let your brothers fight, and you're not going to fight?" Same argument. Mm-hmm. You're not going to let your brothers sustain the economy. You're not going to sustain the economy. So ultimately, it is a great danger to the state of Israel. It's interesting that when I published that piece in commentary, it was called 7 Existential Threats Facing the State of Israel. It sparked a great debate in my think tank at the time at the Shalem Center.
Right.
Natan Sharansky and Bogi Ayalon were there. They took great issue with me. They said the Haredim are not an existential threat. They are an opportunity. Okay? I see the opportunity there, but we're not at the point where we can say they're an opportunity. Right now, they're a threat. We saw it during Corona. Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it on the Mount Meron disaster. You should know that of the 7 existential threats, the greatest single threat was what I called the hemorrhaging of Israeli sovereignty, which was our failure and refusal to impose or even affect our sovereignty over large segments of our population and large territories within the state of Israel. I lived for many years in the Negev, 62% of the country. There's no law. There's law for Israeli Jews, but there's no law for Israeli Bedouin. They build what they want to. They violate all of our laws against polygamy. They bring in women from the West Bank, from Gaza, from Iraq, from Jordan. It's chattel slavery. And they have, 40, 50, 60 kids per family. They take over a hillside, and the hillside's gone. So today you have a virtually unbroken belt of Bedouin illegal settlement that extends from the Hebron Hills in the east to the Gaza border in the west, cutting off the Negev. And those Bedouin have undergone a twin processes of Palestinization. They're now Palestinians. They weren't before. And Islamizations. Hamas and Islamic movement is very, very big. You always see the green mosque now in Bedouin villages. You never used to see that. And indeed, Ram, the Arab party in the coalition, is a Bedouin Islamicist party. Now, these processes took place because Israel just didn't bother. We left the Bedouin to Hamas. We left the Bedouin to Palestinian nationalism. And we didn't impose our laws on polygamy. We didn't impose our laws on illegal settlement. And so that, too, is an existential issue. The hemorrhaging of sovereignty. We don't impose our laws about education in the Haredi sector. We don't collect taxes. We don't enforce order on Mount Meron. All of these are serious, serious challenges to Israel's future. I can think, as an historian, where they come from. We didn't have sovereignty for 2,000 years, so we're not particularly good at it. We don't quite understand it. We don't come from 800 years of democratic thought like you in the United States and Great Britain, Australia. We come from Eastern Europe and the Middle East, and we don't understand democracy very well either. I got to tell you the truth. We're sort of like learning as we run, but we may not have a track that's long enough. And that's my concern.
Yep, those are important points. Les, I want to ask you about your own writing. So first, after a career as a historian, you've now embraced a new identity as a novelist. Why become a novelist at this point? And are there more novels, or are there more histories in your future as a writer?
The answer to that is yes. Actually, you got it backwards. I was a fiction writer long before I was a historian writer. And I began writing poetry as a kid. I wrote film scripts. I went off to Hollywood. I was Orson Welles' assistant. And only left Hollywood because I was getting too old to be in the paratroopers, and I had to go and be in the paratroopers. So I had these two hats. And studied history, Middle Eastern history at Princeton, only because I didn't get into the Iowa Writers Workshop. You can't make this up. So I've published now four works of fiction, 2 in the last year, with our friend Adam Bello and at Wicked Sun. And I have another novel probably coming out next year. So I'm writing all the time. I'm now well into my second collection of short stories. And I love the short story form. Wonderful form. Historically, I'm working on 2 projects, which are, strangely enough, sound very, very familiar, very similar. One is called Israel 2048, which is a vision of Israel on its 100th birthday, what kind of state we want here, in terms of foreign policy, social policy, health, education, a Jewish world, peace process, you name it, it's in this book. I sat down and it was actually a project that I began in the Prime Minister's office together with the Prime Minister, but then Corona came and we had to lock ourselves away, so I wrote it by myself, and now I'm in the process of transforming that manuscript into a book, translating it into several languages, and disseminating it to the Israeli public in order to stimulate a discussion which is not taking place here about our future. No one is talking about our future. What kind of state do we want to leave for our children, our grandchildren? It's a crucial discussion here. The other project is Israel 1948, is to do for Israel's War of Independence what I did for the Six-Day War. Our creational story has been robbed from us. It's been transformed and sullied into a story of apartheid and ethnic cleansing and war crimes, you name it. We have to reclaim the story. It is, Jonathan, it is not just, it is certainly the greatest story in modern history, not just modern Jewish history, in modern history, period. It's one of the great stories in human history. The emergence of the State of Israel, 3 years after the Holocaust, almost to the date, by the way, against impossible odds. We have to reclaim that story. There's a big challenge there because the Shalem Center, where I worked for many years, is no longer a research center. It's now a college. And there are actually no research centers in Israel that support historical writing. So I have to go out there and raise funds to write a book. But I think that book is absolutely essential for future generations. It has to be on that shelf behind you. It has to be on the shelf of anybody who cares about Israel, who needs to know about Israel. Our young people don't know how this country was created. They have no idea.
Well, that's very important, and we need more of your books. Let me ask you just one final thing. Tell us a little about your discipline as a writer. What time of day do you like to write?
I write.
And is this something that you do in a disciplined fashion every day, or how does that go?
Every day. I take off a couple of. I usually start writing around 6 in the morning. 6:30, but some days I'm also an avid oarsman and have been for many years. I have a single scull that I keep on the mighty Yarkon River of Tel Aviv. So I was out this morning, did about 14 kilometers of rowing this morning. Then I came back and wrote. I wrote an op-ed about Afghanistan and its implications for Israel and the Middle East. And any given day I'll either write fiction or nonfiction. It's easy for me because it comes from different parts of my brain. I can go from one to the other, back and forth, and I've been doing this, basically all my life. So I have that output, and I write for the American press. I write for Mosaic. I write for Tablet. I write for the Atlantic. I love these forums. My biggest frustration, I must tell you, is the almost total disappearance of forums for publishing short stories. Commentary used to publish short stories. Why no short stories anymore?
I think that's a question for a different editor, not me anymore.
Really, but almost no forums. Almost no short stories.
That's very true. Michael, you've given us so much to think about and so many insights. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank our audience for tuning in. Both on Spotify and the various audio platforms and on our YouTube channel, as well as those who will eventually be watching this on JBS TV. Thank you to all of you. Please follow, give us good reviews on whatever platform you're watching us, and please tune in again next week. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, brought to you by the Jewish News Syndicate, jns.org. Visit us at jns.org, and please follow at Amazon and Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts.